Hello and welcome to the Squeaky Wheel Podcast. We speak with leading influencers about policy, industry and more across cycling, walking and all other forms of micromobility. My name is Phil Latz and I've been squeaking about various causes for over 40 years.
And I'm Irene McAleese, co-founder of the cycling technology and data company C-Sense. And we're on a mission to help cities transform for more cycling and micro-mobility using data. Today's episode is breaking out of our normal mold. Instead of one guest, we have 6, all recorded at the 2025 Velo-city conference in Gdansk in Poland. Hey Phil, I've noticed Turn doesn't sell e-bikes directly to consumers online like some brands. Why is that?
Well, Turn views e-bikes, especially cargo bikes, as serious transportation tools, not toys. So test rides, expert assembly and professional service aren't extras, they're essential for safety and long-term performance.
But buying online is usually cheaper.
Yeah, sure it is up front, but once you click buy, you're on your own. No experts to help with fit, assembly or local service. Most people need this help.
I also heard some shops won't even service direct-to-consumer bikes actually.
That's absolutely right. But with Turn, your local dealer is your long-term partner. They know the bikes inside and out and which accessories fit your lifestyle. They'll help you get the most out of your bike with regular checkups and expert care.
That's some serious peace of mind then, especially if you're carrying kids around.
Exactly. Expert local service keeps the bike riding better, lasting longer and feeling safer. There's real value in that.
So how was Velo-city, Phil?
Well, it was great, Irene, and it's such a privilege to be able to attend. It wasn't quite the biggest Velo-city ever. Gdansk is a little off the beaten track compared to if it had been held in Paris or Berlin or somewhere like that. But it was still a great event and I was glad I could attend. The venue was a little bit lacking in atmosphere. It was a modern expo centre out in the industrial suburbs, and as you know, sometimes they're in city centres where there's more of a buzz around the show because you've been to the odd Velo-city or two in your time as well, haven't you, Irene?
Oh gosh, yes. Maybe about 6, I think,
6?
off the top of my head.
You're just, I've only been to 4, so you've outshone me. Which 6 have you been to?
Well, okay, the first one I went to was where I met you actually, which was in Taipei one. There was definitely the Nijmegen one in the Netherlands, which was fantastic. That was a standout one. Rio was amazing to go to as well. And then I think there were some more sort of European ones, Lisbon, Ghent, Leipzig. They're the ones I can think of off the top of my head.
Oh, there you go. So we both went to the Arnhem and Nijmegen one, and I didn't even realise you were there. But then it normally gets well over 1,000 delegates, and these days close to 1,500. So it is quite a big show. It's grown significantly, and also the expo's grown a lot too. A lot of bike share companies, public facility solutions such as e-bike charging, bike parking, docking stations, and a lot of software and data companies, which I know would be very close to your heart, Irene.
Yeah. And what about Gdansk itself? I mean, usually the host city is doing something interesting along the lines of cycling, and it's been part of their pitch to win the gig.
In fact, the next 2 years are already confirmed, and they're working on the 3 years out in terms of the host city. It's really quite a competition to become host city. I'd never been to Poland before. In fact, I'd never been to the former Soviet Eastern Bloc countries at all. And the country really suffered under 4 decades of Soviet Union control and repression. They used to have food rations. They were the poorest country in Europe, and they've transformed to the wealthiest economy of those former Eastern Bloc countries. But you can still see signs of a very hard past. There's still some reasonably grim areas, but cycling-wise, Gdansk is going under a radical transformation from virtually no cycling infrastructure to really quite good. I'd say it's better than most Australian cities.
Wow.
Not at the Amsterdam or Copenhagen level, but for example, I was staying in the city centre right across from the main train station, and I was able to ride on separated bike path all the way there and back every day on a share bike They've also got a very busy tram and train network that I can attest to, having stayed directly overlooking the train station. It was unbelievable. And it was sunrise from 4 a.m. till sunset at 10 p.m., being in far northern Europe.
Yeah.
You wake up at 4 a.m. and look out the window and there's already people around and trains running. What are these people doing? Don't they sleep? But overall, it was a great experience. And as a visitor, the old city was a revelation to me. It's still got the old walled city, as many European cities do, but magnificent old buildings and the maritime history. There's this 500, 600-year-old crane there, not a crane as you and I would think of it. Think of two stone towers with a wooden structure between it. Unbelievable, just worth a look. And I found visiting the Solidarity Museum to be a very emotional experience. So Solidarity, if you haven't studied your history, Lech Wałęsa, I'm old enough to remember seeing this on my TV screen in the early 1980s when all these strikes were happening. These were shipyard trade unionists that initially were perhaps just striking for better pay and conditions, but it grew to a strike for freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And unionists were murdered. They were hauled up by the secret police and interrogated. They were persecuted. But ultimately, they prevailed over the might of the Soviet Union, and Poland became the first free country, and soon the Berlin Wall fell, and the whole world history was changed forever. So that museum, I get emotional.
Wow.
Even just thinking about it now, unbelievable struggle of these total underdogs to change the system, and yet they achieved it. And I think, although it sounds a bit dramatic, there are parallels for bike advocates and active transport advocates in that we're a relatively small, relatively poor group of people trying to change a huge, powerful, entrenched system.
Yeah.
Not at the level these guys. We're not getting killed and persecuted and jailed and so on as these guys were. But nevertheless, it just goes to show that it is possible.
Wow, that does sound amazing. I have to put my hand up. I didn't know that story about what happened there in Poland. So, and I've been interested in the trade union movement, and I never heard that story. So
you really need Solidarity. Look it up. You really need to be probably 60 or older to have remembered it, because we're talking 45 years ago now.
Yeah.
But I vividly remember it when it was happening. I had a keen sense for sort of activism and democracy from a pretty young age. And so I well remember it as it unfolded in real time. But if you get a chance to go to that museum, I'd highly recommend it.
So what about our friend Jill that we interviewed? Did you catch up with her?
Yes, that's right. We interviewed her 2 episodes ago. Yes, I did. And she is the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation, which own and oversee Velo-city. So she has a very prominent role at the conference, on stage quite a lot. And as we knew from the podcast, they formally announced her retirement coming up at the end of this year on stage in the final session of the conference. And they did a wonderful photo montage on the big screen of different events and achievements through her time as CEO, gave her a big bunch of flowers, a standing ovation from the whole audience. It was really wonderful. And in her farewell speech, if you like, she repeated her key point from our podcast to focus on your why. People want to support your why, not your what. So it was great to be in the room and see that. It was really something.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear.
Absolutely.
So it's exciting to hear about the new appointee has been announced as well.
Indeed. Moving on, what I did at Velo-city was Vox Pops. So I interviewed 6 different people, and we're about to go to that recording now. Just apologies for the background noise. It was hard to find quiet spaces. There were close to 1,500 other people in the room, so to speak. And I'd like to thank all the guests for gladly agreeing to take part and giving such great insights.
Okay, I'm really excited to hear the conversations that you had. So now let's go to Gdansk.
Velo-city is a global conference with about 1,500 delegates from around the world. Each year it's held in a different city. This year it was held in Gdansk, Poland. Gdansk is famous for its shipyards where the Solidarity trade union movement was birthed. If you're as old as me, you would remember watching on TV back in the early 1980s as Lech Wałęsa led this movement to protest against the communist-controlled government of Poland, which was part of the Soviet Union. Ultimately, those remarkable and courageous protests led to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the entire Soviet Union. That movement inspired the graphics for the conference, with the giant, almost dinosaur-looking cranes from the shipyards forming the backdrop of the stage, and also inspired the conference theme, Inspiring Solidarity. Velo-city represented a unique opportunity for me to get a global snapshot without leaving the conference venue. I deliberately aimed to get a range of voices from across continents, but I asked each of our guests to focus on their home cities. Even though their situations are vastly different, their challenges are often similar. First, I asked each speaker to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Aangi Shah. I am from Mumbai in India, and I work with the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy.
My name is Amanda Ngabirano. I live in SETA. It's called SETA.
My name is Chris Brundtland, and I work for an organization called the Dutch Cycling Embassy, based in Utrecht in the Netherlands.
I'm Karen van Kluizen. I'm the Secretary General of Polis, which is a European network of cities and regions on urban mobility and innovation.
My name is Philippe Christ. I'm a Franco-American from Nashville, Tennessee, but also now living just outside of Paris in Saint-Germain.
My name is Eleanor McMahon, and I live in Burlington, Ontario, Canada. And Burlington is a suburb of Canada's largest city, Toronto. I am the chair of the board of an organization I founded, married my husband, the Share the Road Cycling Coalition, which is a provincial cycling advocacy and public policy organization.
First, I asked each speaker to describe the current situation in their home city. Aangi Shah from Mumbai, India.
It's tragic, to be completely honest here. It's unfortunate that I think Mumbai grew at a really rapid pace over the past 30 to 40 years. And the focus was so much on just making sure that, there's housing, millions and millions of migrants who were coming in, and the population was growing at such a rapid pace that infrastructure or even having sidewalks, or what we call footpaths in India, was not prioritized. And a lot more focus was given on streets for cars, because those were the people that had a lot of voice and could commute from one point to another and needed to. The second priority, the focus was given to public transport, which is great. We have these local trains that go from the north of the city to the south. It's like a linear city. So a lot of north-south trains that go on, very frequent. And for most of the people who don't have cars usually sort of rely on these trains. But for the first and last mile connectivity, unfortunately, and that's where cycling or micromobility kind of fits. Unfortunately, there's little or no effort that's put in. And it's changing, but at a very slow pace, because there isn't enough noise, or the voices of the people who actually have to walk and cycle, those who cannot afford other modes, are not loud enough. And so those whose voices are loud enough are sort of training the next generation and the generation after that to just grow up, use cars, and go about life. So it's extremely tragic, and I hope it changes sometime soon.
Amanda Ngabirano from Nairobi, Kenya.
There are many people who are walking more than people are cycling, but there are more bicycle riders outside Kampala. Some cities like Soroti, Lira in the northeast, in the east, generally the north, they ride a lot of bicycles. Wow. Now in Kampala, we have a huge walking population, but the only challenge we have is, can we keep that population with 60%? Walking in the current conditions, or are we going to lose them if we don't provide for them? Because definitely, for most of them, it's not out of choice. It's because they have no other means, other way to travel. So they walk, and some distances are long, which I think is not sustainable. They will definitely want to shift to a car. But I can imagine that if we provide cycling infrastructure, we shall see more people riding the bicycles. So I look at it as a risk and an opportunity at the same time. We might lose this number. Wow. And it's harder to shift people from the car to the bicycle than to maintain people walking and riding. It will be very difficult because we have to convince people, we have to give them not innovations, rewards, incentives. I was looking for the word incentives.
Yeah.
So giving them incentives is going to be harder for us than to try and provide for them right now so we can keep them. Also, there are many people driving cars who wish to shift, to change, have different modes, to walk safely, to ride safely. So we will maintain the numbers that we have, but also have more. And that, I think, will be very successful if we can achieve it.
Chris Brundtlet from Delft, Netherlands.
Delft is really a remarkable little city and was kind of, I think, the quintessential 15-minute city before that became a buzzword. Everything is within a very short walk or cycle ride, everything you need. And it's quietly been, over the past several decades, a real innovator in terms of the policy and infrastructure that's been developed in the Netherlands. So it's, 50% of all journeys in the city are made by bicycle, about 20% by foot, another 10% by public transport, and then 20% by private car. So it's 80% sustainable mode share, which I think is quite remarkable, and it means it's a very vibrant, livable, inclusive and prosperous city.
Karen van Clausen from Brussels, Belgium.
Well, actually, Brussels has come a long way. I mean, it's always been featuring high in the top 10 of most congested cities in the world, and it has always been perceived as a car-centric city. But over the past decade in particular, there's been a lot of change in the city, and the current transport minister, Elke van den Brandt, has really put a lot of good measures in place that have helped to make this transformation a reality. So they introduced 30 kilometer per hour zones. They introduced a new circulation plan, redirecting car traffic out of the city center. They invested and are investing a lot in cycling infrastructure, also made very good use, for example, of the pandemic to roll out temporary measures and accelerate the rollout of bike lanes, for example, and then make those temporary measures permanent in time. And they also have a sustainable urban mobility plan called Good Move that is very ambitious and really brings this integrated package of measures to the table. And they've been awarded by the European Commission for their mobility plan as well. So that's really great. At the same time, it's also a politically challenging situation. Right now, 1 year after the elections, Brussels still doesn't have a new government. So unfortunately, that is currently slowing down progress and making things very challenging. So I hope that will be resolved very soon and that the transport minister that we currently have can continue the good work that she has initiated over the past years. But it's good that you mention or that you bring up the city where I work, because when we talk about active travel, when we talk about sustainable mobility, we always end up with the Amsterdams and the Copenhagens of this world. But there's another group of cities which are really making progress as well. And sometimes, when you talk about Copenhagen or Amsterdam, as great as they are, cities that are not as forward-looking or that are not pioneers like that will say, I can't compare to them. It's out of my league anyway. And that's the end of the conversation. Whereas with cities like Brussels, it shows you that even for the most congested cities with a lot of challenges on the table, change can happen if you have a clear vision and if you have an integrated package of solutions that you consistently work with. So that gives me hope.
Philippe Christ from Paris, France.
I have to say that Paris was a human-scale city before the cycling boom that we see now. It is a walking city. It is a public transport city. Only about 30% of households own a car in the city. So it is already a human-scale city. But what happened after COVID is that cycling became not only a new option for many people because they're getting out of public transport because of the pandemic, but it's become a compelling choice because the city has invested massively in facilitating infrastructure, sometimes not always of great quality at the outset, but certainly now they're catching up with that. So it is becoming a cycling city once again, because it has been, up until the 1950s, been a cycling city as well.
Eleanor McMahon from Toronto, Canada.
I would say that currently Toronto, as Canada's largest city, is going through a lot of growing pains. There's a lot of construction in Toronto, a lot of chaos on the road, because there's a lot of transit projects that have been underway now for about 10 years. And as everyone knows, those take a great deal of time. Toronto is beset by a motor-normative or car-centric mentality. However, it's not as though people necessarily want to drive, but they're forced to drive because our transit network and our cycling network are both works in progress. I would say that in the past 10 years, cycling has grown extensively in Toronto, both as a daily mode of transportation and as a connection to transit. Governments have been moving slowly but deliberately to make investments in infrastructure.
Next, I asked each guest what was the main challenge their city faced at the moment.
I think the biggest challenge is sort of the perception towards cycling as a mode of transport in India. It's more of a social problem where people understand cycling to be a more backward mode. And everyone's aspiring to be bigger and richer in a developing country. And as they start climbing the ladder, as they start getting more money, it's almost obvious or almost like the logical next step to get a car. It's aspirational. It's cool. It means I have made it. It means I have the money. I can take my family out and I can do these things. I don't need to rely on public transport or walking or cycling because it's backward. It means I'm poor.
Right now, it's the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the biggest challenge. If people see the infrastructure, they will definitely try to shift, to move, and also buy bicycles. The next challenge after that, I think, is the mindset, especially of the leaders. People who take decisions, the policy makers. I think it's not more about the mindset of the citizens, of the road users. It's more about the mindset of leaders who take decisions in the boardrooms, do the budgeting, do the selection of contractors. That one is the one that we need to focus on. Once we have that fixed, then the rest will be easier.
I think this is a challenge that's familiar to a lot of cities around the world, is with the rise of the electric bike, with the diversity of different types of micromobility, from step scooters to food delivery drivers, cargo cyclists, fat tire bikes, this whole different range of vehicles. There's a tension that's being seen and especially in congested urban centers like in Amsterdam, between the slow utilitarian everyday cyclists and the perhaps more fast and cyclists that are perhaps in a bit more of a hurry. And so there's a friction there between the two types of cyclists. And I think every city in the Netherlands is trying to react to it differently in terms of regulation, in terms of infrastructure. But there is no quick fix. And so it's something that Dutch cities are certainly struggling with. And as the Dutch Cycling Embassy travel to cities around the world, it's also interesting because they are also experiencing similar challenges on their streets.
I think the increasing polarization in our society makes it really hard for politicians holding the mobility portfolio to move forward sometimes, because when you take something away, or you reallocate space away from the private car in favor of sustainable options, you meet with backlash. The problem is that there is a very loud minority that speaks up, but there's also a big silent majority which actually agrees with your policies. But dealing with that minority is challenging. And generally, this populism context that we're currently in, I think that's really a big challenge for us to tackle, and for political leaders to deal with. And to stay on course, it requires courage. It's a stereotype or a cliche to say that, but it is so true. And that kind of worries me as well.
It wasn't evident at all that Paris was going to turn out the way it was right during COVID. And the reason it turned out that way is because, to quote, I think it's Ernest Hemingway, describing how one of his characters went bankrupt. That person went bankrupt slowly and then suddenly. Paris became a cycling city slowly and then suddenly. And the slowly bit was 30 years of preparation with bicycle plans and an idea of what the city could look like. Things that were on paper that when COVID hit, then they could put in place immediately 600 kilometers of pop-up bike lanes within 2 weeks. So that was something that people tend to forget, that there was a lot of work before all of a sudden during COVID and right after COVID, it became a cycling city. But you asked, what's the vibe? The vibe in the city of Paris is Parisian energy. And anyone who's been to Paris knows that that's a little bit chaotic at times. So when it comes to cycling, as I said, you have a lot of new infrastructure available. You have some entire streets that have been closed off to cycling. There are a large number of cyclists who are new to cycling in cities. So there's a little bit of finding your way. A lot of the infrastructure isn't fully even in its quality and in its design. And so sometimes there's a bit of wayfinding there. A lot of good-natured energy, bit chaotic, but I think what we see now is that that is all settling down and that it is becoming more and more an everyday cycling city.
The culture wars that many like to talk about in Toronto are not unlike what you see in other large cities where there's a constant tension on the road. However, I would say that the culture war is a bit of a political construct that suits people, some of them currently in public office, who want to talk about a war because that suits their end purpose. But in actual fact, most people in Ontario, and we do a lot of public polling in our organization, are really all just trying to get around in whatever mode of transport they choose. So I think creation of that culture war aspect of the war on the car, that the mayor of Toronto, whose brother is the current premier, by the way, Rob Ford was the mayor, he passed away. His brother Doug is the current premier. And as many people know, the premier has passed legislation to remove bike lanes in Toronto and elsewhere based on his desire to have a car-dominant society, because unfortunately he lives in the 1950s where the car is king, and he is a champion of that sort of entitlement personality and an aspect. As he said recently, I'm not against bikes. I just think they should be, not on main roads. To which I said to a journalist recently, so imagine if we turned that on its head and said, I'm not against cars. I just don't want them where people want to go. I'm reluctant to give him more airtime than he deserves, frankly, because I think when we give him oxygen, it actually feeds his desire to own more of the narrative. So I would prefer to say that he is a challenge, but I think mobilizing the millions of Ontarians, according to our polling, 2.2 million people in Ontario ride their bikes weekly, some of them daily. That's a lot of people in a population of 15 million who are riding their bikes, and that number is going up. We know that people, like in most cities around the world, who cycle now would like to cycle more often, or people who don't cycle, what's the main reason they don't? They're afraid. What gets over that fear? Investments in infrastructure. So the Premier's removal of bike lanes is actually an incredibly deleterious decision or negative decision. But what's even worse is he has created a culture where it's okay to go after cyclists, to make them less than what they really are, and to dehumanize them and make them the other.
Then I asked them to share their biggest win of recent years.
I work at the Institute of Transportation. Honestly, our primary focus is sustainable mobility in India. Yeah. And we have about 2 years ago, rolled out this large challenge with the national ministry. It's called the India Cyclists for Change Challenge, where we had over 100 cities that signed up and sort of learned the rules, learned the tactics on how to get cycling going, the action, that's the actual on-ground implementation, the foundation, which is the policy, and the sort of communication, that is community engagement, and how do we talk about cycling. And I feel like over the past couple of years, it's now become a part of the sort of institutional conversation in multiple cities to start getting the ball rolling, where cycling is not alien and misunderstood, where walking and cycling are looked, it's almost cohesive in India. We don't look at each one isolated from the other, because even walkability is an issue before cycling. So both of them are sort of hand in hand, but both of these things are now starting to be looked at as progressive.
The biggest win that I had is to have the NMT pilots implemented, non-motorized transport pilot corridor. It's a short distance, but it's a hectic part of town, it's downtown. But the citizens accepted the project, the leaders accepted it. It took time, but it was a success story that it happened. And it's a sign that we can do it. We can do more. There's a bike path. There's greening, trees for a shade. There are sitting places for people to rest. The quality of public space is improved. And the citizens, I think, who use that route, feel they are also more human, as they should be.
Yeah.
They feel, this was ours. And that, I think, is very, very nice. That's the biggest win that we got. But also, we have the policy now in place, National Motorized Transport Policy in Uganda. But I think the biggest win, again, will be that we have a bigger network. Not just pilots, not just short routes, trips, but the whole network of cycling to be connected. That's the dream.
I think there's this maybe perception that the Netherlands has done as a cycling country, that it's finished. They've built the infrastructure, they've got almost everybody riding. But I think one thing that continues to inspire me as a Canadian living in the Netherlands is this culture of continual improvement. Every street is been upgraded countless times over the years, often in response to specific incidents and opportunities, or the way to change the street in reaction to current trends. The number of people cycling in cities like Delft means that segregated, protected bike lanes are no longer big enough to cater to the volumes of rush hour traffic. So the next generation of infrastructure that's being built in a lot of cities in the Netherlands, including Delft, is the Fietsstraat, the cycling priority street, where the cyclist is the main user of the street, the car driver is guest. And this is kind of taking the infrastructure to the next level in terms of making the whole street very cycling friendly. And so I don't think the Netherlands has ever rested on its laurels. And so there's always room for improvement in terms of getting more and more people on their bikes.
Well, I think a big win was that she got re-elected, even though we still don't have a government. Like a year ago, she was rewarded for the work that she has been doing.
What's her name, sorry?
Elke van den Brand.
Okay.
So she got re-elected, and that means that she was also rewarded for the work that she has been doing, which doesn't take the polarization away, which doesn't take the fact away that at some point she needed police protection after new measures had been introduced. So it's definitely not an easy job, but there are a lot of silver linings, let's say, and I hope she can continue what she has initiated over the past years.
I mean, it's hard to not say that the closing of the Rue de Rivoli, which is the major east-west thoroughfare in the center of Paris, was not a major win. It is a huge win because it shows. One thing that people may not know is that there was already, right before COVID, a bi-directional bike track that was laid all from one end of the Rue de Rivoli to the other. Massive investment with curb separation. And during COVID, they created the entire Rue de Rivoli, except for one lane, as a bicycle and pedestrian space. So that win, on top of an existing cycling infrastructure, that was already quite large, was a major signal to citizens to say, we're not going to settle for what is good. We're going to really go for what can be the best or even beyond what we could have imagined. And so now when you're cycling east to west, and there are many other thoroughfares that have also been treated in a similar manner, but when you're cycling east to west and you're on this major monumental avenue in the center of Paris, and you have buses in a lane, you have tradesmen and tradeswomen in one lane going, and they have still access to the one lane of traffic. And then you have just this flow of cyclists and e-scooterists and people blocking. You realize that is a signal to the population that this city is no longer going to be a city that is going to be dominated in its public space by cars, and is going to come back to those 60% of people who travel by walking, and now almost 14 to 15% in certain neighborhoods of people who travel by cycling, more than there are people traveling by car in those places.
The staff at the City of Toronto, who are amazing, the advocacy community in Toronto and beyond in Ontario, continue to persevere. There are fabulous cycling cities in Ontario that aren't diminished by the kind of courage that I see amongst mayors and amongst politicians who are meeting the public demand. I enjoyed public office for a while, and so I was a politician. But before I got into politics, I always made the case, and I believe this, that people are ahead of politicians. Politicians are constantly catching up, and they are there to serve people.
Finally, I asked them to predict what progress might happen in their city over the next few years. Here's Aangi Shah again.
I think I'd be happy to start seeing at least some pilots that start to demonstrate success without backlash. I think that would be a massive win, because the moment there's backlash, the moment there's people who just don't want this kind of change, politicians tend to get weaker. Their motivations tend to get weaker. So I'm hoping that we get media on our side, we get some positive feedback on some of these pilots that we're trying to roll out, and that they are successful, and we get people to look at cycling and walking to be cool again. Maybe that's what I can expect.
Amanda in Ngabirano.
In the next 3 years, I would like to see extra kilometers of bike lanes in Kampala, but I would also like to see a system of good public transport running, and also having some institutional changes to enable coordination, collaboration, and working together, not in silos. 3 things. I think that would be really good.
Chris Bruntlet.
Well, these are, I often refer to Dutch problems as champagne problems. They're experiencing a shortage of bike parking in the city centre or at the railway station. They're experiencing this congestion on the cycle paths. These are relatable problems to a car-oriented city, but in a bicycle-oriented context, they perhaps are a little easier to solve in terms of budget and space. But these are still challenges that the city has to solve. And especially now, because the cycling culture isn't necessarily so homogenous, they have to come up with these diverse solutions that work for the diversity of users and cycles. And I say cycles because it's no longer just a 2-wheeled bicycle. It could be a tricycle or any other form of device. So I think the city is working hard to make that diversity work and to make everybody feel welcome on the cycling infrastructure. But it's not a challenge that's going to be solved overnight, or one that's to which there's an easy fix.
Karen Van Clauser.
If she can continue her policy, then I think she will continue on the same course in terms of reallocating space in favor of active travel. Reallocating space is a typical measure that, of course, meets with backlash, but at the same time, I do believe that major reallocation of space is going to be the biggest game changer, not just for Brussels, but for cities in general. Yeah. Making the way our space is distributed in city much fairer, because, still the car is occupying so much space. And you see that sometimes there's issues around the different light mobility modes that start, almost competing with each other for that little space that they have on the roads. So we really need to make sure they get more space, that they don't end up, being in conflict with each other. That's the last thing we want. We don't want the sustainable modes to start fighting or cannibalizing each other. So we really need to give them more space and that way accelerate the transition towards multimodal lifestyles.
Philippe Christ.
It's always a difficult thing because there's been a spurt of energy, a spurt of funding, a very rapid change. And I think in any situation when you achieve so much in so little time, sometimes there's a moment of pause and you have to think about, okay, what's the next step? I imagine that Paris won't be any different, that at a moment when a lot of the pop-up infrastructure has been finalized, has been hardened, there'll be a moment of thinking about what is the next stage, especially since we're coming up to mayoral elections, that may signal a change of the team that's in charge right now. I don't believe that the future will be a rolling back of what we've seen. I do hope that the future will be an extension of what we've seen, not just to the city of Paris, which accounts for 2 million people, but into the neighboring communities in the first ring around Paris. Keep in mind that the region of Ile-de-France, in which Paris is the center, is about 12 million people. And what we can already see is that there are infrastructures and bicycle infrastructures and policies that are being put into place in the first ring that are extending what we see in Paris. And I think that will be the next big thing, is leaving the city of Paris and going to the neighborhood communities and becoming really not just a city for cyclists, but a region for cyclists.
And finally, Eleanor McMahon.
Politicians serve, as it happened to me, for a certain period of time, and then the public makes a different choice and a different decision. So that requires us advocates to constantly be on our toes, to constantly be working across the aisle, to really inculcate and work with opposition politicians from all stripes, because in actual fact, cycling should never be partisan.
Even the most progressive cities will always face challenges, and for some in our group, particularly living in Mumbai or Kampala, these problems seem insurmountable. But the dedication and accomplishments of those I interviewed, along with many other of the delegates at Velo-city, were inspiring. As history has proven, it's dedicated people like this and their persistence that changes societies over time. I hope our listeners enjoyed hearing those guests as much as I appreciated the opportunity to ask them the questions. Before we end this episode, we always finish with What's Up? Our quick update of what's happening in the human scale mobility world and what we're doing. What's up, Irene?
Well, I think it's interesting what happened in the UK actually just after Velo-city, because there's a kind of a UK version of the Velo-city, their biggest cycling conference, Cycle City Active, which this year was held in York. And there was quite a big announcement that came out of that with 12 of England's regional mayors backing a plan for a new national active travel network. So I think a lot of people are quite excited about hearing the mayors come on board for this, and it is, I think, positive because I think as Chris Boardman sort of mentioned in one of the articles that I read, was that they did some focus group work and found that people are particularly amenable to messages about walking and cycling when it is about children being able to travel safely. So this is where the focus is going to be on this sort of schools network. And what's interesting is they've managed to get mayors from all different persuasions. So Conservative mayors, the Labour mayors, and even one of the Reform Party mayors is on board with this. So, and hopefully this is turning a bit of a corner from the polarisation that we had seen previously, where cycling was a bit of a political football coming up to the last election. So it's nice to see that. And obviously we'll watch that eagerly to see how the funding flows and what actually happens on the ground. But I think that's a really positive piece of news from the UK, and maybe some interesting lessons for others to learn about, you focusing on what you can do around schools and kids and how things can grow from there.
Absolutely. I think UK is really pushing ahead. I just watched last night. If you haven't heard of Street Films, do yourself a favour and look up Street Films and watch their latest on London, where in the city of London, there's now more cycling mode share than there is car mode share.
Yeah.
It's a great 8-minute video, well worth a look.
Yeah. I always thought that headline is interesting because people think, oh, City of London. The City of London, just so people are aware, is actually a very small space. It's like, I don't know, 2 miles by 2 miles or something. So the City of London is the very centre of London, which is a highly urbanised area. Of course, London itself is much wider. And if you look past that headline of, this sounds fantastic on the top line, City of London, but actually it is a small area. So people need to be aware that that's not all of London, but it is, I don't want to take away from the fact that it is still a great piece of news.
Absolutely. And to be fair to the video, they did explain that too in the video.
Okay.
That it is actually the city centre. So they weren't being misleading. But carry on, Irene. What else is up?
Just something that we're a bit proud of for C-Sense is a new video has come out, put out by the Transport Accident Commission in Victoria, highlighting an exciting project we've been working on with Surf Coast Council, how they've used the C-Sense data to inform the design of some new infrastructure, and they're using it for monitoring and evaluation of a roundabout that's gone in there. Head over to the C-Sense LinkedIn page where I've put a link to that if you're interested to see, because they interview cyclists who've been using the lights, that they interview the local mayor, they interview the engineers who've been using the data, who found it really interesting. So this is a really proud moment for us to see the stories come to life and to see the TAC, a big organisation like that, posting that as a case study. And there is inviting other local authorities across Victoria who want to do something similar in using the C-Sense data to come forward and get in touch. And there are actually a lot of grants available as well for local authorities to use data such as ours. So yeah, have a look at that case study if there are any transport planners working for councils down there in Victoria, and reach out if you think there might be an opportunity to work with us.
Well done, Irene. And let's put a link to that in the show notes to make it easy for them
to
find it, hey?
Thank you.
No problems. So my What's Up A few things. Firstly, we've put a link in the show notes. There's a new ad from Halfords, which is a UK. You liked it, Irene?
I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you did.
I have to admit, I was looking hopefully if there would be a C-Sense bike club. But that's just ingrained in me. I can't help that. It would have been an 11 out of 10 if it had that, but it's still very good.
So what we're talking about is a beautifully filmed ad, quite a big production budget. And it's almost like the Humankind Tour de France, let's call it that. Every age group, every type of bike, very British in its sense of humour. It's a 90-second ad. It's just a lovely, light-hearted piece. So have a look at it in the show notes.
I loved how it highlights all the different types of cyclists, doesn't it really?
Yeah.
All the little subgroups, I think they've really nailed really well.
They did.
And it's good for that because it's pointing out that cycling isn't just the Lycra crowd.
Exactly.
There's a whole range of different type of people on bikes. And that's obviously great that a company like Halfords is celebrating that but also cannily seeing the opportunity in the market. And that's what all the research says, doesn't it? The growth area is not the Lycra crowd. The growth area is more women, more kids, more different age ranges. And unless they start to push into those different segments, they won't get the overall growth. So you can see the strategy behind what they're doing very clearly, but beautifully put together and a joy to watch. So, yeah, check that out.
Indeed. So a couple of other things. Positive news for cycling in two cities. The city of Melbourne in Australia was going to cut its 4-year cycling infrastructure budget from 15 million to 9 million, and that sparked an unprecedented level of campaigning. 1,500 individual submissions to council, which is apparently an all-time record for any issue and off the charts compared to most council issues. And it's just been announced that council has voted to restore the full budget. Oh. And the mayor who was in charge of cutting the budget is now suddenly the champion of cycling, leading the charge to have it restored. So it goes to show that democracy is not dead.
That's fantastic.
And related to that, New York City just had its Democratic primaries, Democratic Party I'm talking about. Each of the major parties, Republican and Democrat in the American system, have primaries, which is where they select their candidate for an upcoming election. And this is for the next mayoral election. The mayor of New York City, it's the biggest, most powerful city in the United States, the most prominent. Being the mayor of New York City is a big deal. And New York City is a staunchly Democrat city, which means that whoever wins that primary usually wins the election, which is due in November. And the favourite was Andrew Cuomo, who's a big money, second-generation power type player, 3-time state governor of New York State, had to resign after, I think, 16 women accused him of sexual misconduct, something like that.
Oh.
Unbelievable story.
Gosh.
The fact that he would even run again, but he was favourite. He was favourite, and he's a total anti-public transport, pro-car type of dude. So he was the favourite, and a complete outsider, a bloke by the name of Zoran Mamdani, who's only about 33 years old, beat the big money party machine and won by a large margin and won the Democratic primary. So Cuomo is now running as an independent, and Mamdani's policies on walking and cycling and public transport are truly radical by USA standards. I've put a link in the show notes to a detailed survey he did for streetsblog.org, and have a look for yourself. So election's not till November. He has to manage not to get assassinated or some other thing happen between now and then. But at this stage, he's the front runner to be the New York City mayor, which would be really an amazing turnaround.
That's interesting because they've had all those issues with the congestion pricing in New York as well, which affects the amount of cars that are on the streets in the city centre.
So congestion pricing was implemented at the start of the year. It's still in place. As much as Mr. Trump has vowed he would get rid of it, he constitutionally can't get rid of it right now unless he throws out the Constitution or overturns the courts or what have you. So congestion charging is still in place in Manhattan, and all of the data is showing that it's a massive success.
Yeah. It can only help to have a supportive mayor in that's presumably going to want to sustain that in the face of challenge.
We'll have to wait till November to see what happens.
Yeah. Good.
And finally, during my Europe trip, I got to ride around Berlin, Brussels, Copenhagen and Oslo, and also attend Micromobility Europe and the Eurobike show, as well as the Velo-city show that we've talked about this podcast. And at Eurobike, a new sponsor, Turn, kindly invited me to their annual turnout dinner. And it was wonderful to be able to spend an evening with those guys. It was a great time. I really enjoyed hanging out with the dealers and distributors from around the world. So thanks a lot for the invite to that event. And hopefully I can get an invite next year, Irene.
The turnout dinner. I like that.
And I've even got the button I should show you.
That's quite witty, isn't it?
Yeah, TERN, turnout.
Yeah.
I've got the little metal button. I've put it in my souvenir drawer, actually, because that's one to cherish, I think. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode, Irene. Thanks, everyone who's listened through to the end of this podcast. If you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe via your favourite podcast platform. We're planning to release one new episode per month on the third Thursday of each month.
And please also leave us a review or a rating on your preferred platform. We'd really appreciate that. You can also find out more about the Squeaky Wheel Podcast and contact us directly via our website, squeakywheelpodcast.com. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And don't forget to squeak.